The Australian Financial Review.
Welcome to The Fin, Election 2025. I'm Lisa Murray with political editor Phillip Coorey, New South Wales political correspondent Paul Karp, and former Labor advisor and AFR columnist Lidija Ivanovski.
Well, this is the sweetest victory of all.
It's Tuesday, April 8.
Who do you trust to keep the economy strong? Who do you trust to keep interest rates low?
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
The light on the hill.
Set it aflame again.
Tonight, the Australian people have voted for change.
Hi Phil, Paul, Lidija.
Hi, Liz.
G'day. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on week 2 of the election podcast, and what a week it is. As we head towards the vote on May 3, the Fin podcast has gathered a panel of the Financial Review's finest political minds to take you inside the campaign and break down the big issues for voters and strategists. I can't wait to get to Lidija because she's run one of these campaigns before, but I'm going to start with Phil. The markets are crazy. The world is scrambling to respond to Donald Trump's tariff decision. And here, both political parties are telling us they are the best choice to lead Australia in times of economic uncertainty. Phil, which side has the stronger argument so far? And is this going to be the dominant issue of the campaign now?
It's a good question, Lisa. We really weren't anticipating this level of interference from Trump in the campaign probably until late last week when he unveiled the extent of those tariffs, and they were a bit bigger than everyone probably thought they were going to be a few weeks back. As to who's benefiting, I think it's a little. I don't want to be a fence sitter here, but in times of crisis, international crisis, voters always tend to gravitate towards the incumbent. So you'd have to think this benefits Albanese and Jim Chalmers. The Liberals obviously want to make it benefit them, so they're drawing on their perceived strength as superior economic managers, and we saw Peter Dutton extending that to sort of security. He wasn't talking just about recessions, but wars breaking out all over the place. So they're trying to recalibrate their own struggling campaign, if you like, by saying, look, now's not the time for a Labor Greens government. You need, the coalition. So I'd say on balance it's probably favouring the incumbent at this stage just because it does. And also when you have that uncertainty and when you're talking about superannuation, recessions, unemployment, people probably feel safer insofar as a Labor government might be more inclined to look after them.
And is the prospect of rate cuts as a result of this economic uncertainty a positive for the Labor Party going into the vote?
Look, everyone's going to welcome it. Everyone I know with a mortgage is really looking forward to 4 rate cuts, I can tell you. I think it's apparent that's not because of anything the government's doing. It's because the economy's going to hit the anchors very quickly. So on Monday this week, the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, was effectively jawboning the RBA by very pointedly noting the market predictions of now 4 rate cuts, including a possible 50 basis point cut in May. So clearly the government wants it to happen. Clearly they said it'd be beneficial towards them, but it won't actually affect the campaign, Lisa, because the first meeting's not until May 20, I think, so after polling day. But I guess if that spectre of them is there, the government might try and bask in that glow.
It could affect the sentiment. Lidija, you've lived these campaigns. You were Chief of Staff to Richard Marles for 3 years. You had a huge role in the last election campaign. What do you think about Dutton's backflip on work from home? What impact will that have on the campaign?
I'll probably start with the backflip just because it's top of mind. I think Miriam Robin in your paper has got an excellent piece about how Dutton's managed to pee off a whole bunch of, I think she talks about women, but I think it's also men as well that have embraced flexible working. There's a saying about politics, if you've got to eat a shit sandwich, eat it quickly. I think letting it bleed a week and a half into the campaign sort of gives him another week starting on the back foot. We had him talking about not living at the lodge last week and instead opting for Kirribilli. This week we've got him dumping the policy. I think this policy actually was probably one where he showed how completely out of touch he is with working people and the modern workforce. There's a lot of men and women that enjoy flexibility that has come from being able to work from home. Personally speaking, I drove in from Geelong to Melbourne studio this morning. I spent an hour and 40 minutes on the road. That's time I would have gladly been doing something more productive. I just think that the policy was an absolute bin fire of a policy, and the fact that it took him a week and a half to cotton on that it was sinking is not a good sign.
It was ham-fisted. I mean, there is a case to be made if you're talking just about the public sector, especially in Canberra. There is a productivity problem there, and there are a lot of people working from home, and we're not talking people besieged by massive commute times or anything like that. And there is an issue there with performance and productivity in the Commonwealth public sector, and they do have the most generous EVA in the world in terms of 5 days at home. But, 100%, it just came out all pardon the term, arse about and aggressive, and didn't really bother to differentiate, and it was couched in that anti-work from home language.
Yeah.
It was obvious from day dot. Just women I know, in the private sector took it personally, and you could tell from day one this had not been done well, not thought through at all. Mm. I mean, if you're going to do something like this, Lydia'd know better, but you road test this stuff, don't you? You focus group it and you pick up these obvious downsides, and none of that was done. It was sort of a Canberra bashing exercise designed to curry favour in the suburbs, but it's probably had exactly the opposite effect.
The New South Wales government is a bit further along on this journey because Chris Minns, the Department of Premier and Cabinet, sent round a circular last year that basically ordered public servants back into the office, although that was done in a much more sensitive and balanced way because it just has to be your primary place of work, your dominant place of work. So that can be sort of 3 days a week is how a lot of agencies and departments are interpreting it. And here in New South Wales, Liberals sort of grumbled that he got the great headlines of doing the hairy-chested thing of forcing people back to the office, but the way that it was applied was actually incredibly, moderate. And they knew that this Dutton policy was a bit of a stinker before the federal party was prepared to admit it. They could see that it was hurting, particularly with winning back women. Yeah.
Can I just add? I think that's spot on, Paul. And I think what Phil said about trying to curry favour by bashing Canberra bureaucrats because the cafes are empty when you drive around that, parliamentary triangle is one thing. I think it's the fact that it scared the heck out of a lot of workers that it would set a precedent for companies to then impose this. And that's what really caused the unintended effects of the policy. And I do feel for Jane Hume having to go out and sell this. She's probably the best retail salesperson they have in trying to claw back some of these TLCs. And for her to have to go out and sell this and then dump it, pretty hard going on her.
She was pretty keen on it. I mean, she was gung ho on it when she announced it at the Sydney Institute. It was all everyone punching the air.
That's the job, Phil.
I know, but she, it was her idea. It was a real echo chamber, but suddenly she's the orphan. No one else is claiming ownership of it.
And Lydia, where does this sit in terms of backflips in a campaign? Can you think of one that's had a similar effect?
Look, I think everyone tends to use former Queensland Premier Peter Beattie as the kind of 101 art form of the backflip where he turned it into a net positive because he would kind of let something float for 24 hours and then would go down like, a lead balloon, and he'd come out and he'd say, I've listened to the people, we're going to dump this terrible, terrible idea, and he'd get rapturous applause and a, increase in his primary vote, which is something remarkable, and I don't think anyone's been able to emulate as much as they've tried. I think we've seen, and Phil could probably talk more about this, a little bit on the stage 3 tax cuts and Labor kind of sending mixed signals before it dumped them.
Yeah, the one that springs to mind is the real Julia thing in terms of in terms of a mid-campaign reversal. Normally you get rid of the irky stuff, the barnacles before the campaign. You don't get rid of them in the middle of the campaign, and that was the old Howard adage. But I think back it was 2010 when Julia Gillard did an interview with the Herald Sun and admitted she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. And from now on, you'd see the real Julia. And so I think in terms of jaw-dropping, it's just sort of that's the only comparative moment I can really think of. That.
Just to put the backflip in broader context, I think what Dutton is trying to do is to narrow the contest and present a smaller target. He's also done it with ruling out changes to same job, same pay. The biggest policy difference between the Liberal and Labor Party is the nuclear policy, which they barely mention now. He's presenting a smaller and smaller target. He really only wants you to be thinking about the petrol excise cut as the only thing that people will be thinking of.
Paul, I want to pick up on some reporting you've been doing. Muslim communities played a significant role in both the US and UK elections. And so you have looked into whether it's going to play a role in this election. The Muslim vote is mobilising candidates to take on government ministers in Labor heartland seats. Will they have an impact?
Yes, so there are independent candidates. Dr. Ziad Bassiouni is running against the Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke in the Western Sydney seat of Watson. And then there's also an opponent, Ahmed Aouf, is running against the Education Minister Jason Clare in Blaxland. So there are independents that are endorsed by the Muslim vote. The one main issue that they're campaigning on is the Albanese government's response to Israel's military response in Gaza. They want it labelled a genocide. They want more sanctions and more action against Israel. But, I mean, the difficulty is that in these parts of Western Sydney, although people are very upset about those things, cost of living is still the number one issue. So how do you break through when the issue that brought your campaign to prominence might not be the number one issue for voters, which is cost of living? There are also, Labor strongholds, unlike the seat of Fowler that Labor lost to an independent at the last election. The incumbents seem to be relatively well known. They've been there sort of 20 years. They're not outsiders. So it is a very difficult ask. And also the Liberals are not going to do them any favours, unlikely to give preferences to the independents to push them over the line. So I think what we're seeing, though, is the strategy is shifting from one of possibly knocking off those Labor ministers to claim a spot on the crossbench and to hold the balance of power. The Muslim vote, which endorsed the candidates, is now looking at maybe playing a bit more of a spoiler role and punishing Labor. So they've said that they are going to announce a candidate in Werriwa, which is around Liverpool in southwest Sydney, and that is a traditional Liberal Labor marginal where the preferences of an independent candidate could throw the seat to the opposition. And they've also got a candidate, but they haven't made a call yet on whether to run in Parramatta, another Liberal Labor marginal. So they're trying to get more leverage for their community by running more candidates. At this stage, I'd say it's not likely they're going to break through and win seats, but they're definitely giving voice to a community concern and forcing Labor to pay a lot more attention to these parts of the city that they're not used to fighting big campaigns.
Paul, could I ask you a question? I haven't seen Tony Burke at all this campaign. Is he just tied down in his seat, like door knocking? Because he's played no real role at all on the national stage. We didn't even see him when we had the cyber hacks into the super accounts. He's meant to be the Home Affairs Minister. Is he just panicking, or? I
think the independents are claiming as a victory that there's more door knocking and handing out outside train stations going on. Although I think Burke's absence on the national stage might also be explained by, Home Affairs is not considered a traditional Labor strength. And, there was the controversy whipped up before about mass citizenship ceremonies that they might not want to be reminding voters about that portfolio area at all, not just because of these seats, but because of broader issues. But yes, he's spending more time in his own seat this time.
He's shaking a few more hands. So we'll be right back after the break with all the latest from the polls, why it's taken the betting market so long to catch up, and what our panel expects out of the leaders' debate. Welcome back to the Fin Election 2025. I'm Lisa Murray and I'm talking with political editor Phil Coorey, New South Wales political correspondent Paul Karp and former Labor advisor Lidija Ivanovski. We've talked about Dutton's backflip on work from home. We've talked about the market turmoil and how that's playing into the election. Phil, what are the latest polls saying?
The latest polls are telling us, Lisa, that a Labor majority is now firmly back in play. As we entered the campaign in the weeks before the campaign, the two most likely options were either a Liberal minority or a Labor minority. We're back to sort of, I think, where we were in the early second half of last year, where the two most likely prospects now are a Labor government, either majority or minority. We saw a news poll this week which had Labor leading on the two-party vote by 52-48, and their primary was back to 33 and the Liberals, the coalition was down to 36. They're the numbers we saw at the last election. Right? So if that spread was the same as the last election, which was enough to give Labor, I think it was 77 seats on the day, they're now back within reach of forming majority in their own right. And that, I think, is significant. And there's nothing suggesting the Liberals are going to form a majority. I think that ship's well and truly sailed, but they'll be doing well now just to have a fighting chance of minority.
Mm. And Phil, the bookies have finally caught up.
Yeah, the old follow the money couldn't be less correct when it comes to politics. We've seen it before. We saw the bookies, they just base their odds on public expectation, and sometimes expectation can be out of kilter sometimes because, people don't know how to write polls or don't know how to interpret polls. And we saw this in 2019 when the bookmakers paid out on the Wednesday on all the votes on Bill Shorten and Labor. And then, as we know, Scott Morrison snatched that one off them. But back in February, Lisa, and I couldn't quite understand this. I mean, we all came back from the summer holidays and people in the street, people, backbenchers in Parliament, that sort of thing, rules. Just there's this sentiment out there that the Liberals had it in the bag, and I couldn't work out where it was coming from because if you looked at the numbers, they have to come from such a long way back, on a national basis to win 19 seats, and even if they were ahead 51-49, that was not going to get them close to that. But the bookmakers picked up on that. They were offering $15 on a Labor majority. On Sportsbet back in mid-February. It's now $3. The Liberals were $2.90 on a majority back in February, and they're now out to $10. And Labor's at shorter odds than the Liberal coalition now to form minority. So the bookmakers have finally caught up, I think, with the reality. I'm not saying it's over. There's a lot. We've got 2.5 weeks to go in this campaign if we remove the Easter break. But the way this campaign is trending, if the election was held this weekend, definitely Labor would be a Labor government one way or the other.
And Lidija, you've been inside the tent. How much, political parties always say we don't look at the polls. How much attention do they pay to the polls or the betting markets?
Not so much the betting markets, and I think Phil's spot on about whoever got the $1 million payout on Shorten the week before the election. I think obviously political parties have focus groups and nightly tracks that they run every day of a campaign. And that gives them information that is held fairly tightly because you obviously don't want nervous MPs getting information that validates their view one way or the other. They do track sentiment. They do course correct when they need to. I think that was the kind of, just to go back to the work from home thing, I think the week and a half is the only thing that needs further explanation because they would have seen this tanking. They started last week with the curability, measuring up the curtain story. They had a week and a half to dump this. Instead of dumping it last week, they've started another week of the campaign with another bit of a shocker for Dutton. So I think he's on the back foot. There is still a long way to go, of course, but it's been a pretty bad start for Dutton, and I think you'd rather be Albanese at this point. And you think back to where we were sort of 8 weeks ago when all the polls were how stuffed Labor is, and it's, if he can claw and scratch his way to a minority government, that'd be a great thing. And now you've got sort of Peter on the back foot, and it is early days. But if I was the Albanese camp, I'd be feeling pretty good about his chances of working from the lodge for another couple of years.
So we have a listener question from Rowan from the Inner West in Sydney. So Rowan asks, who is the most effective politician you have ever seen on a campaign trail and why? And how do Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton compare?
John Howard, hands down, just understood people, understood the mob. He could talk to anyone, and he had an amazing memory. So isn't so much about walking through shopping centres and stuff, but if you ran into some local official at some place, he remembered the last time he met them. And I remember we ran into the mayor of Nyngan once, and his first question was, "How's the wife's leg?" Because last time he met her, she was having her veins done. I mean, that guy was brilliant, and he could disarm people. I mean, I wasn't around for Bob Hawke, but I assume he was similar. Very, very, and there's a reason why Howard and Hawke had a high mutual respect for each other, because they were very, very similar in terms of being politicians. But yeah, no, watching Howard work is magic. He was, he could talk to anyone about anything, anytime. You know, whether it was sport, business, family stuff. And I contrast that to the stumbling awkwardness of Kevin Rudd or Malcolm Turnbull, who just were unable to make conversation with normal people. So yeah, I'd give it to Howard.
I would say Tony Abbott. I mean, I wasn't in the Canberra Press Gallery then, but, you know, huge swing to him in 2010, turning that into a minority government and then winning in 2013. I don't think he was a hugely intellectually honest campaigner because the label of a carbon tax was not accurate for describing Labor's policy. But in terms of how aggressively he pushed that line, obviously very successful. But, of course, the other cautionary tale about Tony Abbott is that in order to win, he made some promises about no cuts to health and education, which didn't end up being accurate. The 2014 budget broke all those promises and undone his government. So the important thing with this question is also to remember that effective campaigners do not necessarily make effective governments.
Just riffing from that, Paul, I think probably controversial, but internationally it's hard to go past the Trump. His ability to dominate the conversation and appeal directly to voters. We're obviously all paying the price now, whether it's our share portfolios or super funds taking a battering. But if you think about the way that he was able to just completely dislodge traditional campaigning and own the space, I think an example is when there was the attempted assassination on now President Trump. The first thing he did was raise a fist knowing that he'd be able to get some media leverage out of it. I think I've got to throw the Trump in for just his ability to campaign ferociously and completely destroy people, and also just stand there and just talk smack, like absolute smack, and just people lap it up.
Yeah. Well, I think Phil was saying before the record started that we've got 3 candidates in this race and one of them is Trump. So he's having a big impact here as well. Let's move on to what we can look forward to over the next week. And obviously that starts with the leaders' debate tonight.
Yeah, so it's Tuesday as we speak to each other, Tuesday late morning. So it's not actually a debate, it's a community forum. So it's the Sky News exercise. So they take questions from the floor with Kieran Gilbert moderating it. These are often better than debates because you just get curly ones from the punters and you can get tripped up. I think the leaders sort of calm themselves by the fact, and not with no disrespect to Sky, but not a lot of people have it at home. So it's not like, you know, the whole country's watching on the ABC or something like that. But having said that, if you mess up, it will be repeated on, you know, everywhere. So they are important. It'll be good to see. I mean, interesting to see whether Dutton can sort of. I don't think he's lost his composure. He's had a shocking week, but he's maintaining his temperament and his composure. But whether he can sort of get back into the game using the economic argument they're now prosecuting about whether our budget is in a fit state to withstand what's coming. And the other thing, Lisa, I guess coming up this week, we've got the Treasurers tomorrow night too, so that'll be a rerun of that, and then the battle of the energy ministers on Thursday with Bowen versus Ted at Ted O'Brien versus Chris Bowen at the National Press Club. So that's the debates for the week.
And then, Phil, the campaign launches.
I'm struggling to understand this. I know because Easter and Anzac Day are going to wipe out effectively the much of the campaign. The ideal time to launch a campaign is 2 weekends out, right? So Labor got in early, and they're going this Sunday in Perth. Now, the Liberals have decided to do theirs on Sunday as well in Sydney. That's fine. You know, they've obviously realised somewhere in Western Sydney is probably where they need to make make an impression, but I cannot understand why they're doing it on the same day. Even with Peter Dutton needs wins, right? He needs differentiation and he needs to win days. You're not going to win a day by neutralising the government. Every news report, TV report, newspaper report, internet report, blog will say Albanese and Dutton squared off today at their campaign launches. For the life of me, I can't see they didn't do it on Monday or Tuesday early next week, just to get their own clean air, just to get their own message out. Because for Albanese, a draw is a win now. Every day he can either not lose is a victory for him because he's ahead. And this goes back to what we were saying a bit. They're making some very strange decisions on their campaign. I even thought last week Dutton choosing to wake up in Perth on Liberation Day, where he's got a 3-hour disadvantage. So by the time he got out of bed and, Albanese had been all over the place for 3 hours responding to Trump with his 5-point plan and, he woke up on the East Coast, jumped in at 8:30, took the breakfast TV spot with a live press conference. And it's just these little things, they sort of matter. And, so the launches are important. Of course they are. That there'll be a big policy there and you get all the razzle-dazzle and the red meat speech in the warm-up and stuff. But as I said, they're just going to neutralise each other and I can't see that as anything other than a victory for Labor. Unless Albo falls off the stage again.
Yeah. And Lidija, Albanese will launch in Perth. How important is choice of that campaign launch city?
A lot of deliberation goes into where the launch takes place. I agree with Phil. It's not great for Dutton that he's not going to get any clear air. It just makes no sense. You're basically, by virtue of standing up in front of a blue curtain with hoopla of former leaders and luminaries of the party guaranteed to sweep the nightly news, the fact that he's willing to give 50 of that away to Albo is interesting, particularly when he's the opposition leader and he needs to spend more time trying to clamour for airspace. I think where the seats are, where the launches are, gives you a sense of where their heads are at. Labor knows after the recent WA election, it's got a pretty popular friendly Labor premier there who'll do a very good warm-up act. It's got some seats it needs to retain and it doesn't have any structural issues in WA because they're continuing to sort of print money and acquire Ford Rangers and jet skis at an alarming pace thanks to commodities.
Yeah, I think the location is signalling who you care about, and it's also, I think the advantage of Perth is that voters in Western Australia consider their interests as West Australians a lot more. I wrote a feature about the GST deal, and the reason that campaign to get that floor put in was so successful because voters in WA were thinking about their state's interests in a way that Victorians and New South Welsh people don't necessarily do.
Are you calling them parochial, Paul?
Well, that would be the sledge. Yeah, a provincial mindset.
I'm
maybe.
from South Australia. I understand it well.
The provincial mindset, and I think maybe Western Sydney as well has a distinct geographic identity, and the coalition needs to win a few more long shot seats in that part of the world.
The other thing too, Lisa, if I could, remember it was WA which delivered Labor majority government at the last election. Remember, everyone thought they had to win it in Queensland and they went backwards in Queensland, but they picked up 4 extra seats. And the result in Western Australia had nothing really to do with Anthony Albanese. The Labor's post-election review confirmed that. It was a combination of things. It was a deep disdain for Scott Morrison and a deep disdain for Clive Palmer, who, remember, tried to force open WA's borders in the High Court, something which the Morrison government foolishly supported in its early stages. There was the stratospheric and never-to-be-matched popularity of Mark McGowan, the Labor Premier, and then there was the drama surrounding the then Coalition Minister, Christian Porter. There was a toxic brew, basically, which saw the Liberals bundled out in WA. And so straight after the election, Albanese, they set about working very hard. He's been to WA 30 times. The Premier there's still really popular. The Liberal Party's still a joke over there. And we saw as we saw in the last state election, and it just hasn't come back. Myself included, we all mistakenly thought WA would just swing back to its natural conservative way after Morrison had departed the scene, and those seats would go back to the Liberal Party, and they haven't. And the Labor vote is holding up very well in WA. So as Paul said, and people in Labor will tell you this too, if you go to WA, if you go to Perth or Adelaide or Hobart, they know you're in town, right? If you go to Sydney or Melbourne, they don't know you're in town.
Yeah.
And so he's already, they announced it a couple of weeks ago. They're going to do it in Perth, and they got front page treatment.
Yep.
Albo comes to Perth. It's free publicity, whereas, you could let an atom bomb off in Sydney and no one would know.
I think campaign launches do tend to get over-egged a bit. It is such an insider story, right? Where is it going to be? What does it mean? Who's speaking? Who's sitting? Can we assemble? Who's talking to who, and where do we put them in the front row, and who's not talking to who, and do we have the right gender balance, and making sure you've got a gender split, making sure that everyone in the Labor camp is wearing designated shade of red, making sure that everyone in the Liberal camp has got their blue ties on and blue jackets with, soft shoulders. But I do think if you think about the proposition that Dutton has brought to the first 2 weeks of the campaign, what is he offering the people of Perth? What is his proposition there? Like, in terms of cost of living, in terms of announcements, I think he needs to come out with something big and soon to change the conversation from where it is right now, which is all about his unforced errors.
Well, I, for one, will be looking out for the colour scheme at both the campaign launches. Thanks all for your time.
No worries, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Phil, every episode we ask you to reveal your favourite quote of the week. What do you have for us?
So as I did last week, Lisa, I found it difficult to narrow it down to one. So the runner-up is 2 words, Peter Dutton saying "got him" when he kicked the football and accidentally hit the cameraman Gaith Nadir from Channel 10. I think it was important because it wasn't the thing. He shouldn't have said that. He should have said, "Sorry, mate, are you okay?" And he got in a lot of trouble for that because he came across as callous. But tiny things like that can really bring you undone. However, I will give Dutton the points this week on another quote, admitting we got it wrong on the work from home thing and apologising. It doesn't happen nearly enough in politics, and so it's good to hear every now and then that we stuffed up. Sorry.
It's nice to hear you being so upbeat about our leaders too, Phil. Unusual.
I'm always upbeat.
We're listening to what people have to say. We've made a mistake in relation to the policy. We apologise for that and we've dealt with it. But we're not going to be framed up by a Prime Minister who's...
Thank you for joining us for the Fin Election 2025. I'm Lisa Murray with Phil Coorey, Paul Karp and Lidija Ivanovski. The Fin Election 2025 is produced by Lap Fan and Alex Gow, with thanks to Debbie Harrington. Our theme is by Alex Gow. Lap Fan is head of podcast. Fiona Buffini is head of premium content. If you like the show and want to hear more, follow us wherever you get your podcasts and consider rating and reviewing us as it helps others find us. For more stories about markets, business and power, subscribe to the Financial Review at afr.com/subscribe. See you on Thursday when we discuss the takeover battle for HealthScope. Bye for now.
The Australian Financial Review.